You're not afraid of failure, you're afraid of succeeding. Take a moment to reflect. Have you ever, lying in bed before sleep, imagined yourself completely free? Free from fear, from others' expectations, from the need to conform? And what did you feel in that moment? Exhilaration or fear? Why do we so often abandon our true desires? Why do we prefer predictable mediocrity to unknown greatness? Why do most of us live as cowards, without even realizing it? Today we'll dive into the dark waters of the human psyche to understand the nature of our collective cowardice and blind obedience. And I warn you now, what you learn might change your life. Imagine this scenario: an office meeting. Your manager proposes an idea that seems absurd to you. You see its flaws, understand that it will lead to problems, but around you, colleagues nod, agree, smile, and you nod along with them. Familiar? In 1951, psychologist Solomon Asch conducted an experiment that reveals the essence of this phenomenon. The test subject was in a room with 8 plants who deliberately gave wrong answers to simple questions about line lengths. And in 75% of cases, the real subject agreed with the obviously incorrect opinion of the majority at least once. But it's not just about conformity, it's about something much deeper. Erich Fromm in Escape from Freedom talked about a paradox. When given freedom, people often experience not joy, but existential terror. Freedom means responsibility. Freedom means choice. Freedom means the possibility of making mistakes. And for many, this seems unbearable. But why? Our brains evolved to ensure survival, not happiness. And what promotes survival better than anything? Belonging to a group. We are social creatures. For our ancestors, exile from the tribe was tantamount to a death sentence. This ancient fear still lives within us. When you contradict the group, your brain registers it as a threat to survival. Literally. Research shows that social disapproval activates the same brain regions as physical pain. Think about it. Your fear of contradicting your boss, colleague, parents, partner. It's not just social awkwardness. It's a survival instinct coming from the depths of time. You think that by submitting, you're choosing safety? Let me ask, what are you losing in the process? Imagine a woman who endures humiliation in a marriage for decades. Why doesn't she leave? For the children? For financial reasons? Because that's what's expected. But what if the real reason is fear of confronting her own power? Psychologist Carol Dweck talks about 2 types of mindsets: fixed and growth. People with a fixed mindset believe their abilities are predetermined. They fear challenges because failure would confirm their inadequacy. People with a growth mindset believe they can develop. They see difficulties as opportunities for growth. But what's even more important, a person with a growth mindset isn't afraid of their own greatness. They're ready to shine, to stand out, to take risks. And what do you choose? Carl Jung wrote about the shadow, the dark side of our personality that we refuse to acknowledge. But in this shadow lies not only our destructiveness, but also our power, our passion, our authenticity. When we submit, when we become cowards, we reject our shadow. We become halfway, incomplete. We lose access to the part of ourselves that makes us truly alive. Remember your childhood. You ran through puddles, shouted with joy, hugged trees, asked uncomfortable questions, danced when you felt like dancing. And then? What happened then? We don't do that. What will people think? Behave properly? Gradually, step by step, your authenticity was replaced with a socially acceptable mask. And now, as an adult, you might not even remember what it's like to be real. In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted one of the most shocking experiments in history. Participants were asked to punish another person, actually an actor, with electric shocks when they made mistakes in a task. The voltage gradually increased, up to a lethal 450 volts. The result? 65% of participants were willing to go all the way to the highest mark, despite the suffering of the victim, simply because they were told to do so by a person in a white coat. This experiment is often cited as proof that most people are capable of cruelty. But the meaning is deeper. It's proof of how easily we abandon our moral autonomy, our internal compass in favor of external authority. After the experiment, many participants said, "I was just following instructions." This phrase is familiar to us from the most terrible pages of human history. But consider, how many times a day do you just follow instructions? How many times do you transfer responsibility for your life to someone else, a boss, spouse, parents, society? We become indignant when we read about Milgram. "I would never," we say. But the truth is that most of us make moral compromises every day, betray ourselves a little every day, and we do it without thinking, automatically. "We wear masks and gradually become like them," wrote psychologist Robert Benno. Imagine a middle manager. Every morning he puts on a suit, smiles at colleagues, agrees with management decisions, even if he thinks they're wrong. "It's just a job," he tells himself. "I'm not really like this." But this is self-deception. You can't pretend for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and not become the person you're playing. Psychologist Leon Festinger called this cognitive dissonance. When our actions contradict our beliefs, psychological discomfort arises, and it's easier to change beliefs than behavior. So a person who initially submitted out of fear begins to believe that submission is right, that it's their choice, their preference. And if you ask them, "Are you happy?" they will most likely shrug and answer, "Like everyone else." But what lies behind this "like everyone else"? Quiet desperation, suppressed rage, unwept tears? Thoreau wrote, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." In the 21st century, this desperation manifests in record levels of depression, anxiety, addictions. We silence the voice of our authenticity with alcohol, drugs, endless social media scrolling, work, shopping. But the voice doesn't disappear. It gets quieter and quieter and quieter, until one day, often already on the deathbed, a person realizes they've lived someone else's life. Now let's look broader. You think your cowardice is just your problem? Something personal that can be fixed by simply gathering courage? But what if cowardice is a systemic phenomenon? What if the system is deliberately designed to encourage submission and punish the disobedient? Take modern corporate culture. It declares the value of innovation, creativity, initiative. But what happens to real innovators and nonconformists? How often do they climb the career ladder compared to those who just know how to play by the rules? Research shows people who challenge the status quo are often perceived as a threat, even if their ideas could benefit the company. They are marginalized, ignored, and sometimes fired. The education system is also built on obedience. We teach children to sit still, raise their hand before speaking, follow instructions. We rarely teach them to question authorities, think critically, stand up for their own opinion. And what happens to people who refuse to play by the rules? They are marginalized. They're called difficult, maladaptive, not a team player. And gradually, a social selection forms. Those who submit receive rewards. Those who don't submit are punished. And in a generation, we have a society where cowardice is the norm and courage is an anomaly. Remember the film The Matrix? It's not just science fiction about people used as batteries. It's a profound metaphor for how most people prefer comfortable illusion to uncomfortable reality. Agent Smith says, "Did you know that the first Matrix was designed to be a perfect human world? Where no one suffered, where everyone was happy. It was a disaster. No one would accept the program." This phrase contains a deep truth. We're not just victims of the system. We're its accomplices. We choose the blue pill every day when we reject our authenticity, when we obey meaningless rules, when we stay silent when we should speak. Most people, like Cypher in the film, would prefer to return to the Matrix, forget the truth, live in comforting lies. Ignorance is bliss, he says. But the truth is that subconsciously we know about our choice. And this hidden truth corrodes us from within, like acid. You can deceive your mind, but you cannot deceive your body. And your body knows the truth about your life. Research shows a connection between suppression of authenticity and physical illnesses. Psychosomatic disorders, chronic fatigue, weakened immunity, all of these can be physical expressions of suppressed truth. Psychologist Gabor Mate, in his work with seriously ill people, noticed a pattern. Many of them had ignored their true needs for others all their lives. They were good, obedient, selfless, convenient, and their bodies rebelled. Imagine that your body is a wise friend who sees your life from the outside. What would it tell you now? Keep submitting, it's working great. Or is it trying to reach you through tension, fatigue, illness? Perhaps you're thinking now, this isn't about me, I'm not a coward, I'm just a realist, pragmatist, responsible person. Let's check. Here are some signs that you might be living from fear, not authenticity. Constant later. I'll do what I truly love when I retire, pay off the mortgage, raise the kids. The future becomes a place where you'll finally live. But this future never comes. Procrastinating important decisions. You stay for years in relationships that don't satisfy you. You work for decades at a job you hate. You always find logical reasons not to change anything. Perfectionism. This isn't striving for perfection, but fear of disapproval. You don't start a project until you're sure you'll do it perfectly, which means you never start. Chronic blamer. You always find someone to blame for your problems, the government, boss, parents, partner. This allows you to avoid responsibility for your life. Approval dependency. Before making a decision, you ask several people's opinions, and often follow not the advice that resonates with you, but the one given by the most authoritative person. Avoiding conflict at all costs. You agree, smile, nod, even when inside you're boiling with disagreement. Harmony in relationships is more important to you than truth. Lack of clear boundaries. You can't say no even when you want to. You take on obligations that drain you, out of fear of disappointing others. Constant comparison. You measure your worth through comparison with others, and this paralyzes you. There will always be someone more successful, beautiful, wealthy. Recognize yourself in at least one point. Perhaps you live in the captivity of fear more than you're willing to admit. If you've read this far, it means part of you resonates with what I'm saying. It means you have the courage to face the truth. How do you find the path to your authenticity? How do you stop being a coward? First, realize you can't stop being afraid. Fear is part of the human experience. Courage is not the absence of fear, but action despite it. Mountain climbers who conquer Everest experience terror, but they keep going. That's courage. Second, start small. You don't need to change your entire life at once. Start with small acts of courage. Say no when you want to say no. Express an opinion that differs from the group's. Do something you consider right, even if it brings temporary discomfort. Third, find your why. Nietzsche said, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." When you know what you live for, what you risk for, fear takes a back seat. Fourth, work with your shadow. Those parts of yourself that you consider unworthy, unacceptable, they often contain the key to your strength. As Jung said, what you deny submits you. What you accept transforms you. And finally, find your tribe. Surround yourself with people who value authenticity more than comfort. People who will support you when you decide to go your own way. Here's a practical exercise that will help you assess how much you're living in accordance with your truth. Imagine yourself at the end of life, looking back. What decisions will you regret having made? Which ones that you didn't make? What will you regret not saying? What that you did say? When we look at our lives from this perspective, it becomes clear that many of our fears are temporary and insignificant. In the face of death, fear of social disapproval seems ridiculous. But regret about an unlived life is very real and very painful. Nurse Bronnie Ware, who worked with the dying, found that the most common regret at the end of life is, I regret that I didn't have the courage to live a life true to myself, but instead the life others expected of me. Don't become one of those who realizes at the end of the journey that they never truly lived. Here we approach a deep paradox. True strength requires vulnerability. We think that being strong means hiding our weaknesses, always being confident, never showing doubts. But this is false strength, based on fear. Real strength is the ability to acknowledge your uncertainty, to say, I don't know, to ask for help when needed, to show your feelings even if they make you vulnerable. Vulnerability researcher Brené Brown says, vulnerability is not winning or losing, it's having the courage to show up when you can't control the outcome. When you allow yourself to be vulnerable, an amazing thing happens. You discover that the world doesn't collapse, that people often respond to your authenticity with their authenticity, that connections become deeper, and life richer. Imagine for a moment a society where most people live from courage, not fear, where people say what they think, do what they believe is right, create what they consider valuable. What problems would we solve? How many innovations would appear? How much richer would our culture be? How much deeper our relationships? Instead, we have a society where most suppress their true thoughts and feelings, where dissent is punished, where courage is considered a deviation. And yet, the world is changing. More and more people are refusing blind obedience. More and more people are seeking their path, their voice, their truth. Perhaps we stand on the threshold of a new era, an era of authenticity, an era where courage becomes the norm, not the exception. And you can be part of this change, not through loud declarations or radical actions, but through daily small acts of courage, through fidelity to yourself in small things, which over time become big things. We began with the question, why are most people cowards? I think now you see that the answer is more complex than it seems at first glance. We don't consciously choose cowardice. We fall into it gradually through a series of imperceptible compromises, through a system that rewards obedience and punishes disobedience, through evolutionary mechanisms that make us fear rejection more than we fear personal failure. And yet, we have a choice. There is always a choice. As Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Every day, every hour, every minute, you have the opportunity to choose fear or courage, obedience or authenticity, someone else's life or your own. It's not an easy path. It's a path full of doubts, mistakes, sometimes loneliness. But it's the only path to true freedom. Write in the comments what you've never allowed yourself to do, and what's been holding you back. Maybe it's time to break those chains? And if this topic resonated with you, like and subscribe to the channel. There are many more deep conversations ahead about what it means to be truly alive in a world that often requires us to be dead. And remember, your light frightens you more than your darkness. But the world needs your light. Don't be afraid to shine.